Welcome back. So we did rule number 1 on the factoring rule sheet, which I'm hoping you all are looking at and using every time you're factoring. So rule number 1 is greatest common factor. We are going to learn these rules out of order, but when we finally get to the end, we must use them in order. So we learned rule number 1. Now we're going to learn rule number 4, which is factoring by grouping. Rule number 4, factoring by grouping. Rule number 1 is greatest common factor. Rule number 4, factoring by grouping. So when you are, let's do this. Write it down. 3a squared minus 15a minus a plus 5. Okay. When you are looking at your factoring rule sheet, you would look at something like this and you would go through all the rules in this manner. Rule number 1, is there a greatest common factor? There is not. I can't get a number out of this guy. I can't get a letter out of this last guy. So there is not a greatest common factor. So I would then go to rule number 2. Right now, for our purposes, we are just going to say, no, it is not a special factoring form, because we haven't learned that yet. Then we go on to rule number 3. This is not a trinomial. Trinomial means it has 3 terms. Ours has 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. So this is not a trinomial, so we would move on to rule number 4. Does it have 4 terms? And our answer is yes. So this is the one we would use, factoring by grouping. Now, do not put parentheses around anything here. We will end up with parentheses when we're done, but do not put parentheses now. They will just mess you up. So what I do is factoring by grouping is doing 2 and 2. So just take an underline and underline the first 2 and pretend the second 2 do not exist. We're just going to look at these first 2 and see what is our greatest common factor in these 2. Well, I can get a 3 out of each of them, and I can get an A out of each of them. And as always, I put what I'm factoring out in the front left, and then I will multiply what's left. So 3a squared divided by 3a gives me a, and then minus 15a divided by 3a gives me 5. Now, this next step is very important. A plus or a minus must always, always, always go in this spot. In our case, it will be a minus. You always just take whatever is right in front of the third term, and that is what you bring down. So I am going to rewrite this just so we can see it better. Minus a plus 5. So we factored out 3a. We've got a minus 5. And then I bring the minus down. The only time we do not factor out, or just bring down the sign, is if there is a negative sign in front of our first term and we do not factor out a negative. So here's the thing, guys. Just think whatever this sign in front of the third term is, we just bring down. Unless there's a sign in front, then come talk to me and we'll work it through then. It doesn't happen very often. Now, can I factor anything else out of these 2? I cannot, but I did factor out a negative, which means both of these signs behind it has to change. So this a is negative, so now it becomes positive. This 5 is positive, so now it would become negative. So let's just double check. Negative times a positive a is a negative a, and a negative times a negative 5 is a positive 5. Now, these are my greatest common factors, and so I factor that out, and I'm left from here with 3a minus, and I'm left from here, if I factor out a minus 1, anything divided by itself is 1 because I've got a minus 5 divided by a minus 5. Anything divided by itself equals 1. Over in this area always is where I do my calculation stuff if I need to. Okay, so if I'm going to check this, I'm going to multiply this. A times 3a, this is just FOILing it out, so that's 3a squared. A times negative 1 is negative a. Negative 5 times 3a is negative 5a. And negative 5 times negative 1 is positive 5. It's not in the same order. Let me see. 3 times 5, excuse me, is 15. Sorry about that, guys. It's not in the same order, but it's the same thing as we have here. We did good. Let's do another one. Okay. Kn plus mn minus k minus m. So, rule number 1, any greatest common factors? No, there is not. Rule number 2, it's not a special factoring form. Again, we'll get back to that later. Rule number 3, it is not. This is using your factoring rule sheet. Rule number 3, it is not a trinomial. Rule number 4, it is does have 4 terms, so we're going to factor by grouping. So just underline these two. What can I factor out of these two? Well, I can factor out an n, and that leaves me k from the first term and m from the second term. Just bring down the sign. Can I factor out anything else? No. So, but remember again, I factored out a negative, so both of these signs change. That becomes positive, and so does that guy. Now, this and this are greatest common factors, so I factor that out, meaning it comes out to the front, and everything that's left gets multiplied with it. So what's left from this one is n, and then minus 1. Again, I've got k plus m divided by k plus m. Anything divided by itself equals 1. Besides, if, so let's just do a pretend here. If I came out with k plus n times just n, when I check this, I would have kn plus k plus, excuse me, oops, go back here, get the eraser. I would get mn, but I would miss the minus k minus m. So, make sure that you have that 1 there. It's very, very important. Okay, let's do one more. Always 2 lines between, because that tells me exactly where one problem has stopped and the next one begins. So here we go. 10x squared y squared minus 18 plus 15y squared minus 12x squared. Okay. So rule number 1, any greatest common factors? No. Rule number 2, is it a special factoring form? Nope. Rule number 3, is it a trinomial? No. Rule number 4, does it have 4 terms? Yes, so we're going to factor by grouping. So we do this. I can get 2 out of these 2. That leaves me with 5x squared y squared minus 9, just bring down the sign that's in front of the third term, and then out of this one I can, let me see, a 3, and that's all I can do, So that'd be 5y squared minus 4x squared. Problem, this and this do not match at all. Does that mean I'm done? No. Again, this is not in factored form because I have these being added and subtracted. Remember, a factor is things being multiplied together. This is not being multiplied with this because it's being added. So let's do this. Let's rearrange this, the terms. Let's try something like, oops, signs have to stay the same with it. Let's try something like this and try again. So I can now factor out of 5y squared. That leaves me with 2x squared plus 3. Bring down the negative. Remember, that means every sign behind it's going to change. I can also factor out a 6 here. So that leaves me with 2x squared, positive 2x, plus 3. Oh, look at that now. This and this are my greatest common factor. So I bring it out front, left, and then I'm going to multiply it with everything that's left. So what's left from this, this first one is 5y squared. What's left from the second one is minus 6. And we've got it. That is factoring by grouping. We will be using this a lot in 3B when we get there, which will be our next video.